Hello, I'm Rob from HomeStudioCenter.com. Hope you are doing well, and today I'm here to talk to you all about panning, because panning is a really integral part of mixing, but it's not something that people talk about a lot. There are no set rules, but there are certain techniques that can really help you. Now, one of those is LCR panning, and a lot of people talk about this. This is the technique of panning either hard left, hard right, or center. And I love this technique. I used to use it a lot, but I noticed some flaws in it, and there are some downsides. So I have my own way of addressing panning and my own system, which I call 50-50 panning, which I'm going to reveal to you in this video, and it's going to make your mixes sound wired but balanced at the same time. So all of that is to come. So LCR panning, which is the act of panning left, center, or right, is a great technique. It's used a lot in modern music. To some people, when they first hear this, they think, well, doesn't that sound unnatural? Doesn't that sound weird? And it can sound a bit odd in headphones, but a lot of the time when you're listening on speakers, you'll never notice. And then in headphones, you actually kind of get used to it. And when you do pay attention to a lot of music, you'll notice that quite a lot of the time, things are either hard left, hard right, or center. And this is a great technique for getting loads of space in your mix. It sounds great on speakers because you get much more width. Generally on speakers, if you only pan halfway, for example, it's really not that noticeable. If you pan all the way though, it becomes more noticeable first of all, but it frees up loads of space in the mix because you're really making the full use of the stereo field, so you get great separation. But there are some downsides. First of all, it can sound a bit unnatural on headphones, especially when there's just one part panned hard right but nothing hard left, for example. It starts to sound a bit lopsided and unbalanced, or you just notice it more on headphones because instead of getting the speaker interacting with the environment around you, you're only hearing it in one ear. So you only perceive it in one ear. Obviously on a speaker, you'd hear it in the other one because the speaker's there, but I can still hear it in this ear. Headphones, that won't be the case. So it can sound unnatural on headphones. If you don't pan evenly, you can get a bit of a lopsided mix. Now, that is good sometimes for creating tension and creating interest and adding drama to your mix, really. But a lot of the time, people don't use it intentionally. Instead, they just accidentally make one side too heavy and the other side not heavy enough. And throughout the entire mix, it just sounds unbalanced and uneven. So you can use it for that effect, but make sure you're doing it intentionally. Otherwise, it does sound bad when your entire mix, the whole way through the song, just sounds unbalanced. Another downside is that if it's quite a sparse mix, if there's not much instrumentation going on and you start panning everything hard left and hard right, it can start to sound a bit empty because you've spread everything out too much. And equally, you sometimes get, even with a denser mix with lots of channels, you get this empty space at 50%. So you've got things dead center, you've got things hard left and hard right, but there's so much space in between those that you're not using. Sometimes you actually notice a kind of emptiness there if you really observe the stereo field. Another point is that you're just not making use of the full stereo field. There's so much more space there that you're not using. Now, the alternative, if you consider those downsides, some people would say, well, just pan wherever you want. Pan something slightly right, something else slightly left, and then maybe one thing hard right, another thing 3/4 left, and just do it randomly. That can work. If it works for you, great. But I have a preferred technique, which I call 50-50 panning. This is the act of panning in 50% chunks. So you can still pan hard left and hard right and center, and most of the time I do. But then you could also pan something half left or half right, 50% left, 50% right, or 45 degrees, however you like to think of it, halfway between center and left or right. And when you use that extra bit of space, suddenly you get the benefits and the width and the separation of LCR panning, but then you just fill those gaps in between, so there's no empty space and you're making full use of the stereo field, and it can actually enhance separation even more, because if you have too many things hard left and hard right, suddenly they start to blend together and they don't have separation. So if you want to create separation between something that's hard left and halfway left, it's a great way to do that. If you look at the image in front of you now, it gives you an example of where you could pan certain instruments. So you could have, well, pretty much all the time you want the kick, the snare, the bass and the vocals pan dead center. Then you might pan things like guitars, commonly hard left or hard right, backing vocals, hard left or hard right, other parts like piano parts, any overdubbed parts, hard left or hard right. And then once you've gone through and you've followed this basic LCR process, then choose one or two parts to go 50% on each side. And this doesn't have to be the whole mix. Of course, if there's lots of elements coming in and out, it's never going to be perfect. Don't worry about that. But try to, in general, just fill that halfway point with one or two parts. So let's actually apply this to a mix now. So I've got a finished mix here, but I took all the panning off and I've put the stereo fader in mono. So let's have a listen to how that sounds with 0 panning. And this is how I actually spend most of the mix. I'll apply EQ, balancing, compression, everything else in mono, because it helps you to get separation with EQ and arrangement and balancing and things like that, rather than relying on panning. And then at the very end of the mix, I'll actually go through and pan everything, and suddenly it just opens up. So let's bring my submix, my submaster, into stereo. So now we're in stereo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'm going to listen. I already kind of know what I'm going to do. So in this track, of course, we've got lead vocals, we've got bass drums. So I know I'm probably going to leave the lead vocal, kick, bass, snare. There's no toms. They'll probably all stay center, and that's probably all I'll have center. There's some other little parts like a vinyl noise here, which I'll probably have center. But then apart from that, I've got guitars. I've got quite a lot of guitars. I've got pianos. I've got like these electric drum parts, which are pretty quirky. So I'll probably pan a lot of these, hard left and hard right. Besides that, I've got overheads. Of course, they'll go left and right. So I'm just going to go through now and apply panning to these parts. But I'm only doing hard left or hard right at the moment. We're not going 50% yet. We'll do that in a second. So just quick note with these electronic drum parts, I've just panned them so that they're equally balanced, because I didn't want everything to sound, again, lopsided. So if you have a listen to this, you should hear it going between left and right quite a lot. So I'm going to go through now and I'm just going to keep panning these. Just use your judgment. There's no rules. I'm just going to think about how I want it to sound. Parts that you want to have more focus, pan center. Parts that aren't as important, pan left or right.
Adversity is path to the truth. Consider me perverse and unfaithful. Life has always been good. Many dark corners.
So there we go. I'm happy with that now. It's in LCR, so it's sounding really wide, and there perhaps are some spaces. Let's compare the stereo to mono. Let's start in mono, and then I'll bring this back to stereo.
Adversity is path to the truth. Consider me perverse.
And then back to stereo.
Adversity is path to the truth. Consider me perverse and unfaithful.
Back to mono.
So far my life has always been good. Many dark corners.
So huge difference.
Adversity is path to the truth. Consider me.
But we're still not making full use of the stereo field. It sounds like there's a bit of a gap. Let's try the chorus. Now everything's a bit too wide, and what I would normally do as well is automate it so that the verse is a bit narrower than the chorus and the chorus opens up a bit more. But what we can do now is actually start to pan things halfway. So I think maybe something that could have a bit more focus, because at the moment the things that are on hard left and hard right, they kind of sound a bit more distant. You don't focus on them as much as when they're in the center, because they're only coming out of one speaker. So I think the acoustic guitar would be a nice part to have a bit more center, so that we're hearing that a bit more of the warmth as well. Something that has a lot of low end, generally you want to be towards the center. So let's find that. So we've got one part there. So let's pan that halfway left, like so. But now we're lopsided, so what else could I do? So the piano at the moment is hard left and hard right. Let's listen to that. Now that doesn't sound too natural to me because it sounds too wide. It doesn't sound like a real piano would sound. So that's probably something good that we could do halfway. So now we've got a bit of a space on the halfway right, because we've got an acoustic halfway left but nothing halfway right. So let's find another part to fill that space. So there we go, that's just filled that gap a bit, and I'm happy with that. So normally I would spend a bit more time, but for the sake of demonstration, that's a finished mix to me. We've got the stereo width there from LCR, we've filled the halfway points with one part on either side, and that, I feel like that's sufficient just to make full use of the stereo field and to fill those gaps a bit. So we've got a mix that sounds wide, but also sounds balanced. So it's up to you how many parts you put at that 50% point. I only like to put 1 or 2, and I recommend 2 tops, because otherwise then you're going to start losing the width. But first of all, just go through that process. Start with hard left, hard right and center, and then just put 1 part, maybe 2 at 50%. And that gives you a good structure, so you don't have to think about it too much. You're not going to waste time thinking about where to pan things. Don't worry if it's slightly lopsided. It really doesn't need to sound exact. Don't worry if for one small section it sounds a bit lopsided. As long as the entire mix doesn't sound unbalanced, it's fine. So don't get too concerned with that. Just make sure it sounds wide, make sure it sounds balanced, and that's easy to do using that 50-50 panning technique. So I hope you found that useful. You can head to homestudiocenter.com at any time for loads of free tutorials, loads more free videos, and you can sign up there to get on the emailing list. I've also got a cool resource called an ebook that I called How to EQ Absolutely Anything. If you click the link in the video now or in the description, you can download that for free. And as ever, please subscribe on YouTube. Like this video if you found it useful. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or anything that you want to say about this video, and I'll see you next time.